After what feels like forever and a ton of leaks and discussions, I can finally officially showcase and talk about Valve's new super fun upcoming MOBA shooter, Deadlock. I've been playing this a ton off stream since they specifically asked us not to stream it, but now that the cat's out of the bag, let me explain how the game works and why I think that this game will take the gaming community by storm, along with some Deadlock gameplay to set you guys off. Deadlock is a MOBA-style third-person shooter developed by Valve, you know, the guys who make Dota, Counter-Strike, and whatever, and it's currently in its alpha stage. There's still tons of work to be done when it comes to balancing the level design, hero design, and so much more, but despite being rough around the edges, it's safe to say that the game is incredibly fun through and through, and the base concept of the game is enjoyable, and I'm not gonna lie, it's also incredibly addicting. I want to say though that even though this is a MOBA, it's still incredibly fun to play, so if you get a chance to, then I suggest at least trying it out because it's not too hard to get into and it is fun as hell. I mean, we've been seeing a lot of new titles realizing that capturing the new players off of rip should be the highest priority, and Valve has definitely recognized that with Deadlock, with an extensive guide on how the game works, with guides on how every hero works, and ways to try them out in a firing range style sandbox, in addition to private bot games and then public bot games before you even start playing against real players, all to flex your skills before heading into the actual arena. And even though there are tons of items and heroes with the respective optimal build paths or abilities that you need to unlock in a certain order if you want to perform to your fullest, there's actually no need to go to a third-party site to get all the best builds or the meta builds. There's an in-game system where players can submit their own builds that are then easily accessible from the buy menu in-game, which then can be voted on by the community to bring the best builds forward. Sure, you will eventually be able to figure out a build that works perfectly for you along the way, but this is such a valuable resource for any new player out there, and while I initially struggled so much with figuring out what items I should buy and when I should get them, this made it so much easier for me to get into the game and start popping off myself. At the time of this video, the alpha has a total of 21 heroes that either have a supportish style, a tankish style, or damage roller style with their own unique kits. The gameplay design in most cases is completely different between these different characters, and they all feel different to play. Not to mention that thanks to the extensive amount of items out there, there's so many different builds and ways that you can play every single character, which means that technically the sky's the limit. You can play however you want to. In addition to that, even though it's pretty early to say, I do want to say that the hero design is pretty cool as well. I love the art style, and the characters really shine through quips between the patrons or each other when they run into each other or get a kill on someone on every team. It's clear that most, if not all, the characters know each other in some capacity, which adds a lot of depth to what the lore of Deadlock or backstory of Deadlock will be. I also like how you can choose what legends you want to play when you decide to queue into the game, and then the game just puts together a team and assigns lanes for you. You don't need to make sure you have one of each. It's perfect for the more casual experience, but I'm obviously hoping for some type of draft pick for ranked or competitive. Even better, when selecting what heroes you want to play, the game lets you not only set what heroes you want to play, but you can also select whether you want them to be your priority pick or high priority pick or just something that you're down to play. As for how the game plays out, Deadlock consists of 2 teams of 6 and the map is divided in 4 separate lanes. The players in the game needs to kill minions, each other, and get map objectives such as turrets, the mid-boss, the soul urn, and more, to pick up souls and then purchase items that can give them better stats. There's also items that can be activated to do something cool, like an item that lets you leap forward, or an item that removes debuffs such as stuns or bleeds, and so much more. I don't want to spoil it too much just yet. In order to win, a team needs to push up all the way into the enemy base after going through at least a turret, a walker, an additional set of turrets, 2 shrines, and then they need to weaken the patron, the big flying boss guy that talks to you throughout the entire game, before they eventually need to fight the weakened patron right outside enemy team's spawn. You want to make sure that your own team's minions are pushed right up with you in order to tank the high damage that these different towers can output, which lets you actually deal any meaningful damage back to them towards your map objective. Along every lane, there are these cool railways up in the sky that connect between the bases. The more control you have of a lane, the farther up you can take these rails until you hit the front lines. This lets you quickly move back and forward to and from your base, or rotate around a map, or help your teammates out from spawn, which you can use to let you go back to base and heal out, or go back all the way to buy some items. But keep in mind that there are shops on the front line by the first turret, as well as secret shops spread across the map. Each hero has 4 different abilities that they can unlock and then level up as they go on. As they continue playing, they will connect a special resource which goes into upgrading your moves. Upgrading them will cost you 1 of these resources, then 2, and then 5. And it's up to you what order you want to upgrade them, but they don't only just deal more damage or whatever, there's more to it. For example, upgrading the abilities will occasionally turn them up by a whole new level. For example, Dynamo has a pretty nifty area of effect healing ability, but it locks him to an animation that stops you from moving around, shooting, reloading, or whatever. But at the max level, you no longer need to do the animation, which lets you output heals to yourself and your team, all while being able to supply other types of value at the same time. But anyways, let's actually talk about how the game plays out. When it comes to the laning phase, there's actually a really cool mechanic that sets this game apart from most MOBAs that I've seen, and is reminiscent of Dota, which is the other MOBA developed by Valve. When you last hit an enemy minion, they will release a soul that starts floating upwards. If the soul finishes its entire animation, then the soul, which is another word for your money, gets claimed, and all the money tallies up to you and any potential nearby players. But if an enemy shoots this very orb, then the soul is denied, and instead of you getting the payout, the money will go to the enemy instead. But if you do a better job last hitting your own kills on the minions, then they won't be able to steal them from you. You can also melee last hit the minions, since then the orb won't appear in the first place. The whole mechanic of stealing and denying while juggling, trading damage and space between you and enemy laners makes the laning phase super fun and engaging, and many games are made from last hitting or denying the last hits and then snowballing that lead into a full win. The lanes are pretty close by each other. The map is fairly small, especially when you keep in mind the whole railroad system, so ganking into other lanes is pretty common. Depending on the heroes and the builds, it's actually super easy to do. Thankfully, there's already a pretty hefty ping system built into the game, in addition to a nice in-game chat which alerts you along the top side of the UI if someone says something, which helps you keep up with the team's communication at all times. In addition to going for ganks, there's also somewhat of a jungle in between every lane with tons of different rotational paths, connectors, secret shops that were mentioned previously, and boxes that can be destroyed. They give you a permanent buff like additional ammo, health, or higher fire rate or more. There are also monsters with varying levels and difficulties inside of these jungles, and killing these monsters will grant you additional souls. But moving on into the mid game, once some lanes are slightly pushed up and everyone have started building their own items, as with any MOBA, the game will revolve around snowballing your advantage and building upon it. You want to do everything in your power to get as many objectives as possible, usually turrets or kills, as destroying the first turret gives you something called a flex slot, which will let you purchase more items, and getting more kills not only nets you souls, but also denies enemy players from amassing souls or map presence in the meantime. What's so addicting about MOBAs for me personally is the feeling of snowballing that you will start seeing in the early, if you win your lane, to the mid game. You can actually feel how your character is getting stronger, and the larger the gap is. And depending on how the gap is, you can not only feel yourself getting stronger, but you can feel the distance between you and your enemy growing by the minute, which can let you then steamroll and do whatever you want and then get that win down the line. Obviously, in some cases, there are going to be heroes that are weak at the start and that need some crucial, expensive items to really get the ball rolling, in which case they suck at the start but get impossible to beat if the game takes too long. But that's a problem for the late game rather than the early to mid game. But speaking of the late game, the stakes are very real. The longer the game goes on, a mistake will have the larger consequences. Towards the late game, as you get into late game, more players in the lobby will finish building their heroes, which means that any advantage that you might have had early or mid game starts getting smaller and smaller. If you are on a losing team and you can bring a game to the late game, this is usually the time where you are at the most equal to the team that has the lead, and if you win one or two team fights, you can turn the course of the game entirely. Most teams will want to group up and play around each other to take objectives while avoiding losing one or many members to the enemy team, and that's because depending on how pushed up the lanes are and how many towers and objectives are left standing, getting full wiped can sometimes lead to a full defeat, with the enemy team wiping your patron when all of you are dead and there's nothing you can do about it. This is where positioning, builds, and properly playing off of each other will be the decider whether you win or not, and a single mistake might be the catalyst that costs you the entire game. You kind of stay on edge the whole time when it comes to the late game, carefully waiting for the right opening for you or your teammates to go in, or the enemy team to slip up so you can capitalize on that and win the entire fight. I also briefly mentioned the mid boss earlier in the video. That's this boss which appears in the 10-minute mark, but in most cases you won't be able to fight it until mid to late game. Defeating the mid boss drops the Rejuvenator, which gives you faster spawns and more, and can give you a huge leg up when it comes to map presence. It's a great objective to play for if you can't make a dent in enemies' defenses, or you just can't pin them down for a full fight. Another thing I wanted to mention is that the game has an extensive set of movement mechanics. While I haven't learned them fully yet, not only is there double jumps and dashes, but you can also slide, in which case your weapons don't consume any ammo if you shoot during the slide. You can even dash into a slide to get farther, you can slide down ledges to gain speed and retain momentum, as well as bunny hop and so much more. I will cover movement in a future video, but my point here is that there is so much potential. Overall, I'm super super excited to see where Deadlock will be. It has been available for certain pros and streamers since like May or so this year. As for me, I've only had it for a few weeks, and tons of your favorite pros have been grinding the game like crazy. The game has generated incredible hype behind the scenes, and now we can finally see whether the rest of the community will agree with that hype as well. I wouldn't be surprised if the game is an instant hit when it drops, but time will simply tell if it will be. If it is, then you'll see a lot of coverage from me in the future. I could definitely see myself maining it. Either way, I just wanted to show off the game and talk about it more. Seeing as we're now allowed to, I'll probably try to get some Deadlock streams off soon, but obviously when the queues are open, seeing as they only are open between 1 p.m. to 3 a.m. Central European time on weekdays and 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. on weekends. So it's a bit awkward. It's currently 3 a.m. I want to get this video out as soon as possible because they dropped the news. So we can talk about it literally like 2 hours ago. But anyways, I hope to see you guys in the chat or the comments. If not, I'm gonna see you all next time. All right, peace out. Bye-bye.